Okay, so um, I have to stay home Monday, so to because my son's quarantined because his daycare closed down, but I don't have to quarantine, um, and it's just this is the only day I will be out. That's the plan. So let's go over some stuff for your exam. Just know I'm still in the process of making it. The vast majority of the exam will be multiple choice. Okay. And a lot of them will be like your regular multiple choice, not your source based multiple choice. Okay. There will be a little bit of identify, nothing too crazy. And it will cover chapters 11 through 20. First 9 weeks, we only were able to cover 1 through 10. So we had to throw in 11 and 12 second 9 weeks. Okay. So let's just get started. I'm going to try to go over 11 through 14 as quickly as I can. What I would suggest what you do is take some notes about the review, and that will help you. Don't write down what you do know, write down what you don't know, because that's what you need to study. Okay. So chapter 11 first starts with that American Renaissance, the Romanticism. Remember, the big movement for art and literature will be based off of emotion. That's called Romanticism. Okay, remember we talked about the Hudson River Art School, which painted very romantic landscapes, American landscapes. Okay. There's also John James Audubon with Birds of America, lots of different things. Okay. We also know there'll be a lot of romantic authors like Walt Whitman. You will have Edgar Allan Poe. You will have Thoreau even. You have Nathaniel Hawthorne. You have James Fenimore Cooper. Okay. And just remember that genre is just very, emotional, not as much reason. Okay. We also will have the market revolution some in chapter 11, where we talk about Samuel Morse and his telegraph. We mentioned Eli Whitney and his cotton gin, but also what? Eli Whitney and his what? Interchangeable parts for the musket. Okay. That's going to really, change things for consumers. You have John Deere. John Deere invented the steel-tipped plow to help farmers break up the land faster. We know Samuel Colt will develop the Colt revolver, repeating rifle, basically. Okay. What about Cyrus McCormick? The mechanical reaper. Remember, that's a harvester, so it picks up the crops. Okay, so these are examples like the steel-tip plow and the mechanical reaper are examples of farm mechanization. Okay. Also, let's talk about the American system, not the American system of manufacturing. That's Eli Whitney, but the American system is Henry Clay. Okay, remember Henry Clay's thing had 3 things. One is internal improvements. Federal money for internal improvements. Okay. 2, a second Bank of the United States. And 3, a protective tariff of 1816. All of these are trying to promote an American economy. And remember, there's going to be a big debate about should the federal government pay for things like that, like the internal improvements. Okay. When we talk about women in the market revolution, we know that, the majority of women will still stay home, that cult of domesticity, which stems from Republican motherhood. But we do know that some women will start to work in like textile factories, like what place in Massachusetts? You remember? Lowell, Massachusetts. Okay. Talking about philosophy during this romantic American Renaissance, really think about transcendentalism. Remember, transcendentalists kind of went against the status quo. They did not believe just in doctrines because you should believe in doctrines, that kind of thing. Think like Emerson. Think Thoreau. Okay, they're going to challenge tradition. And a good bit of them will move to utopian communities, or like Thoreau will build a little shack and live on Walden Pond for 2 years. Okay. So there's that. Remember, Thoreau also was the one who wrote Civil Disobedience about his experiences where he didn't pay the poll tax for the Mexican-American War. Remember all that? Okay. Next, we have some slavery stuff. We know that there is the Upper South, which was more about tobacco, and the Lower South is more about cotton. Okay. We know that of all the white Southerners, do you remember the percentage of all the white Southerners who actually owned slaves? 25%. Okay. Next, let's talk. We're into chapter 13 already. Okay. First, it started out with Alexis de Tocqueville. Remember, he wrote, he visited America, and he'll publish his journals, and they'll be called Democracy in America. This is where he first did the phrase American exceptionalism, which means like we're very unique. Okay, but remember, he basically said, hey, people in America are more equal than any other place. And that's going to convince a lot of people in Europe to want to come to America, hence the old immigrants. Think the Irish, the Germans, okay? And we know like the Irish came here a lot because of the Great Potato Famine, and they'll live in the cities like New York for sure, okay? And we know that a lot of the Germans will preserve their culture, and they will move to the Midwest. A lot of them will be like farmers, like Levi Strauss, okay? We know like we get kindergarten, the Conestoga wagon, the covered wagon from the German immigrants. Okay. We know that they will face some discrimination. What do you call the old immigrant nativist group? Remember, if you're a nativist, you're against immigrants, the Know Nothing or the American Party. Okay. Remember, they want to try to ban Catholics from getting office. And of course, they'd want to limit immigration as well. Okay. Also in chapter 13, we have Manifest Destiny. And if there is one president you should associate with Manifest Destiny, it's James K. Polk. Okay, that dark horse candidate of 1844. Remember, he's the one, he only served one term. He only wanted to serve one term. And we will get basically half of Mexico and Oregon in 4 short years. Very efficient president. Okay. We know that he will negotiate for Oregon because he did not want to have 2 wars at the same time. Speaking of wars, what was the war that the South that we will fight? The Mexican-American War. It lasted from 1846 to 1848, and it will. It's the prime example of Manifest Destiny. Remember the whole like border incident with, the American blood has been shed on American soil and the spot resolutions and all that. Zachary Taylor will be a big war hero from that. Okay. The treaty that ends the Mexican-American War is the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And that is where we will buy the Mexican Cession. Cession is spelled with a C, Cession. Okay. And that is where we get all this land, basically half of Mexico. Okay. And remember, even when we declared war in 1846, there's a Senator, David Wilmot, who proposed what about this potential land if we win? David Wilmot proposed that that land be free from slavery, which is called the Wilmot Proviso, which shows you what's the first thing on people's minds at just the thought of America expanding. Will the land have slaves or not? Okay. So then we know that there is California, that gold rush of 1840, gold discovered in 1848 outside of San Francisco. But in 1849, people will migrate, just rush to California, including Asian immigrants, okay? And you'll have all these boom towns pop up, okay? And then people will kind of stop finding gold and all that. But the point is that in a matter of weeks, people will, California will get enough people living there to apply to be a state. And when California applies to be a state, they apply to be for a free state. Okay. And that's going to make a lot of those Southern fire eaters really, really mad. They meet at the Nashville Convention in August, I believe, of 1850, and they talk about seceding. Okay. So again, this will lead to Henry Clay coming up with one more compromise called the Compromise of 1850. So again, background information for the Compromise 1850. Gold rush leads to California wanting to be a free state, which leads to the Nashville Convention. And so Henry Clay needs to come up with a compromise. Okay. The compromise said California would be a free state, popular sovereignty in the Mexican cession. Remember, that starts with a C. No slave trading in D.C. Okay. Texas lost some land. New Mexico got it. It's not too big. But what was the most controversial aspect of the Compromise 1850? The stricter fugitive slave law. Because now it said, and a lot of y'all missed this on a couple things. The stricter fugitive slave law, okay, said that if you were a northerner and you saw a potential runaway slave and you did not apprehend that fugitive slave and throw them in jail or return them to their master, you can now get in trouble. So as a result, some people will refuse, they'll close their jail cells. And like in Massachusetts, that's called a personal liberty law. Speaking of abolitionists, okay, we know that Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, who really exposed the moral, the evils of slavery. We know that Harriet Tubman will help try to end slavery by leading at least 19, I guess you could say, trips to Canada with the Underground Railroad. And also just want to point out the Underground Railroad also went to Mexico, just Canada more, but some went to Mexico. Okay. And then you have, who's the guy that said that slavery was bad economically because it really hurt the white people, the poor white men the most? Y'all remember? It was called the Impending Crisis of the South. Do you remember the guy's name? Hinton R. Helper. So he talked about how it's not morally wrong, it's economically wrong. Okay. So then let's see. The Compromise of 1850 will be passed thanks to Stephen Douglas breaking it up. The reason why the Compromise of 1850 is important is because it delays the Civil War for 10 years, which allows the North to really start, getting industry ready, railroads ready, telegraph wires ready. And, that plays a big role in why they win. Okay. So now let's see. We know in 1831, there will be a slave rebellion in Virginia. Who led the slave rebellion and killed 60 white people in a matter of hours? Nat Turner. As a result of this notorious slave rebellion, Virginia and other southern states will really pass stricter slave codes. Okay. We also know that in 1854, Congress, thanks to Stephen Douglas, will pass the Kansas-Nebraska Act. It created 2 territories, Kansas, Nebraska. And then it said, how will slavery be determined there? You remember 2 words, popular sovereignty, where the citizens in that territory vote to decide. Okay, so popular sovereignty will be first tested in Kansas. Now let's take it back to Kansas-Nebraska Act. There'll be a new party that will form called the Republican Party. They formed to protest the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Okay, the Republican Party, they are against the spread of slavery. They're not against abolition. Okay, they're against the spread of slavery. Remember, the Republican Party comes from like former Whigs, some former Know-Nothings, and some former Free Soilers. A Free Soil, okay, a Free Soiler is not about abolition at all. A Free Soiler basically is someone who would rather have someone be able to work. They're against slavery, not because it's like, oh, we want to free slaves. They're not about that. They believe that people should be able to work for a living. And they're worried, like especially a lot of free soilers were up north, okay? They were worried that if we expanded slavery out west, then a lot of jobs, potential jobs, would go to slaves instead of hiring people. So it has nothing to do with actually like slavery being wrong. It's just they didn't want people to choose to buy slaves instead of hire people. That's what you call the Free Soil movement. Okay. But remember, those 3 groups will kind of merge into the Republican Party, which is formed to protest the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Now back to Kansas, we know that people will cheat in Kansas. And there'll be 2 capitals in Kansas, Lecompton, pro-slavery, and then Topeka, anti-slavery. We know that this is called Bleeding Kansas, where you have the sack on Lawrence, an anti-slavery town is attacked. And so as a result, John Brown will chop up 5 people at Potawatomi Creek Massacre. Okay. Long story short, though, after a while, Kansas eventually will be a free state. Okay. the same week of Kansas, Nebraska, or Bleeding Kansas, we know that there's also Bleeding Sumner in the Senate. Okay. So that's like 1856-ish. Okay. 1857, it's Dred Scott. Dred Scott versus Sanford. Chief Justice Roger Taney. Dred Scott was a slave who lived up north for years, at least 7 years with his master. His master died, and now the son-in-law is like, you're on my will. I'm supposed to inherit you. Dred Scott has some rich lawyer abolitionist friends, and they take it to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court rules against Dred Scott, saying slaves are property. African Americans will never be citizens, okay, which will get repealed by the 14th Amendment, okay? And Congress cannot ban slavery in the new territories because, again, slaves are property. So if Congress says you can't bring your slaves here, Congress is denying that slave owner its property from being able to take their property wherever they want to. Okay. And so that would make people John C. Calhoun's dead at this point. He died in 1852, I believe. Okay. Or 1850, 1852, one of those years. But remember, people there were people who definitely supported slavery in the South, like John C. Calhoun, early, 1830s and stuff. He said that slavery was a positive good. You also have people like George Fitzhugh, which said that, hey, people, what's the difference between slaves in the South and wage slaves up north with immigrants? Okay. Let's see. Yeah, so then what's going to happen? We know about the Lincoln-Douglas debates, which kind of puts Lincoln up for national attention. In 1859, John Brown, a white extreme abolitionist, will lead a rebellion and try to capture Harper's Ferry, Virginia, that federal arsenal there, because he wanted to lead a slave rebellion. He will be captured by the Marines led by Robert E. Lee. Okay, and then you will have in 1860 the election of Lincoln. The election of the Republican Party. Okay, remember, a big reason it was about electoral votes, and more people were living in the North at this time, so there'd be more electoral votes. Okay, and they realized in 1856, when John Fremont ran as the first Republican candidate, that if they could get 4 more states' electoral votes in the 1860 election, they'd get it. So remember, Abraham Lincoln wasn't even mentioned on a Southern ballot. They realized, screw focusing on the South. Let's focus up north. If we can get 4 more states in 1860 to vote for a Republican Party, we got it. It also didn't help the Democrats that they ran 2 people, Douglas and Breckinridge. Okay, so we know that Lincoln will win, and as a result, South Carolina will secede. South Carolina is the first state to secede. Now, please, on your LEQs, okay, if this question is on your exam and for any other review quizzes, whatever, you better spell the word secede right, or secession. Look it up. To secede means to withdraw or to leave. Secession means, a formal withdrawing. Spell it right. Don't do succession. It's secession. Spell it right, or it will be wrong. I'm warning you. Okay. And the South Carolina and 10 other states will form the CSA. Okay. And just remember that Jefferson Davis will be the president. Alexander Stephens will be the vice president. The first CSA capital will be Montgomery. It will then be moved to Richmond once Virginia joins. Remember, I think only about 7 states seceded before Fort Sumter. After Fort Sumter, April 12th, 1861, is when the rest, including Virginia, will secede. Okay, so Tuesday, we're going to cover chapters 15 and 16 in more detail. Okay, so I hope that you've taken some notes. We've covered 11 through 14. There's not going to be that many questions on 11 and 12. There will be a lot more on 13 and 14. So to have some time to really, come up with a list of what you need to study for 11 through 14. Your exam will be Friday. Okay. And what I've done is I've posted some quizzes and a gym kit, and just do them. And that will be great review. And I will see you tomorrow. Bye.